Hey folks, I'm Steve Wong from DXC, also known as Hewlett-Packard Enterprises / merged with CSC. And we got my little Twitter thing up there. And we're going to talk about blockchain and...
I'm Pete Luday, technologist based in San Francisco, working on media things. And the story is that both Steve and I submitted competing proposals to talk about blockchains at HPA this year. So Mark said, you guys deal with it. And we elected to do a peer-to-peer, decentralized, open source presentation, just to make up for that.
All right, by show of hands, who knows what blockchain is? Good, we're going to be asking you specific technical questions about this. It's good, because when I gave this speech about a year ago at Google, probably about 5% of the hands raised. So I think what we've done is really accelerate what's going on. So for you that don't know, blockchain allows an internet user to transfer a unique piece of digital property to another internet user so that is safe and secure. So Mark Andreessen, one of our investors and one of the top VCs in Silicon Valley, thinks this is really important. So do a number of folks.
So today we're going to talk about if this is really a bunch of hype or is it real. We're going to explain how it works, given the time constraints, talk about some concerns that you may have or have heard, and talk about some specific applications for the media and entertainment industry. So first of all, in terms of hype, a lot of you are saying, oh, isn't this one of these bubbles? Once again, it's happening. So we actually pulled out the survey of 900 technical entrepreneurs and got their opinions about what they think is underhyped and overhyped. You see at the top of the list, virtual and augmented reality. It's overhyped. In the middle is blockchain. Only 48% of the surveyed population thought it was overhyped, even less than artificial intelligence technology. So that's not so bad. I like to pull up Google Trends to see what people are searching. So this is a 5-year plot of how many people searched on Google on the term blockchain. And you can see it's sort of been peaking. In fact, here we were at the last HPA with not nearly the activity. So certainly this is a timely topic. You may be wondering how this compares to other activities that we've been working on. So I also pulled this comparison. There's 3D movies in yellow. You can see it's had its heyday. Virtual reality has certainly peaked out, but doesn't seem to be continuing growing. And blockchain is the up-and-comer. So that gives you some indication of what people are interested in learning about. Now, very recently, speaking of our industry, the ISO-IEC Joint Photographic Experts Group made the decision that they were going to start exploring blockchain technology and standards for JPEG. And more specifically, blockchain and distributed ledger technologies promise to be a significant impact on the future of many fields. JPEG is committed to providing standards mechanisms that apply blockchain on multimedia applications in general and on imaging in particular. And you're going to be learning about some of those applications today.
So again, what is blockchain? And we're talking about blockchain. Specifically, I'm going to focus on smart contracts. And Pete's going to talk about some cryptocurrency. But what we're talking about specifically in blockchain is basically a ledger transaction, where you have a peer-to-peer network, in essence. So when you take a look at why blockchain was invented, think about a credit card transaction, in essence. So when you have a perfect blockchain enterprise, the parties that are dealing with each other just don't trust each other, but they have to deal with each other. When you're buying something with a credit card, your bank's in the middle and everyone trusts the bank. So in essence, sort of like Hollywood, a bunch of folks are together that have to deal with each other, but they don't necessarily trust each other. Not that that's bad, it's just the fact. So the basic technology is we have a peer-to-peer network, we have a hash function, and then we also have a public key, basically a private key and a public key that allows individuals or organizations to transact. So when you take a look at a Merkle tree, I was talking to Pete yesterday about this. I like to think of it as MPEG in essence. So when we're looking at MPEG, you have basically a header that has an IMP information. You don't have all the information. It's sort of like a Merkle tree. That root has a little bit of information. So if Pete and if I was going to buy a soda from you, that transaction would have a little bit of, say, A, information about me, one that I've got, money in my bank, and a little bit of information about P, of B, of Pete that he has the rights to sell that to me and everything back. So that's how I like to look at the root. It's just a little bit of information of everything about that transaction.
How does it work exactly?
How does it work? I'm glad you asked, actually. So let's take a look at that transaction where I'm buying a Coke from Pete here. So that first part of that block is that block header. So we want to know that Pete has the right to sell me that particular Coke. So that has information where he bought it from, say, and that he has the right. So that would be, say, that block header. So the next part is he sells it to me. So I have information. You can do that next thing. There you go. You can have information about, everything that he had, his rights, and about our transaction and that rights and everything about the history of that transaction. And again, this would be in an area where everyone could see what's going on specifically on this.
And these blockchains could be used as currency, such as Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency, or Ethereum or Litecoin, or they could be used for transactions using a contract. They're called smart contracts, and they could be exchanging the same information even though there's no necessary monetary value that goes into it. But one of the concerns that I've heard raised is, don't these currency transactions take an extraordinary amount of electrical power? And that was a good question. I hadn't been so aware of it 6 months ago and started to look into that question. And it really takes you down to the issue of mining, because these creations of the blocks are being done on a peer-to-peer network, which is also creating new coins. And I'm going to use the example of Bitcoin mining just because there's more information out there. But this basic premise is equally applicable to Ethereum or Litecoin or any of the other tokens. So the way that mining works in theory is you simply start by picking a random number. Your computer could choose this. It's called a nonce, and it runs about 4.3 billion options there. And from there, you organize all these transactions, such as the Coke that I just bought from Steve, along with everybody else's transactions, into a big bundle. I tie a string around it, and I add in the nonce to create a hash. A hash is a mathematical function which takes a string or a series of strings of any length and exports a unique string of exactly 256 bits. In this case, we're using double SHA-256. And then you simply check the output against the value. If it matches, bing, you win 12.5 Bitcoins, which today, when I did the slide, it was 132,000. As of lunch today, it was $125,000. But maybe that makes it worth the while. The problem is that many, many people are trying to do this along with you, and it takes a whole lot of tries to create those hashes to find the right match. So you're doing how many hashes per second can you do till you accidentally bump into the right one. You used to be able to do that on your laptop back when the hashes were simpler, but now it's gotten much more complicated. So most of the mining is done with GPUs and even into FPGA rigs, as you see these sophisticated data models that are constructed here. A GPU, like a GTX 1080 from NVIDIA, could maybe do 20 or 30 mega hashes per second, million hashes per second. But even that's not enough these days. Oh, and by the way, you might have noticed that it's very hard to find the GPU in stock now. That's why. People are not using them for graphics, they're using them for cryptography. So the latest generation is used in application-specific ICs, or ASICs. One of the larger companies is in China called Bitmain, and they create this Antminer series. This is their premier one. To give you an idea, it has 189 of these ASICs. That's what the black box is. And it uses 16 nanometer technology. Each ASIC has 100 cores simply to crash through these hashes, and it's capable of 14 trillion hashes per second in that one box, while it's consuming 1.4 kilowatts. So it's a pretty hefty appliance specifically built to do this. They're now being built to support not just Bitcoin, but also Litecoin, Dashcoin, and very soon Ethereum. They have a model called the F3 coming out. It's not just strange Chinese companies. The world's largest semiconductor company, Samsung, 2 weeks ago announced that they're going to be entering the ASIC business for Bitcoin harvesting and mining. They're using 7 nanometer technology, which I believe is about as advanced as you can get in today's foundries. So you're going to expect to see 20, 25 trillion hashes per second coming out of these devices. They're currently put into these gigantic data centers, which sit there and do nothing but search, doing all these calculations to find Bitcoins. There's an example of one in the Ordos prefecture in Inner Mongolia that this facility is creating about $1 billion a year in revenue, if you could believe that. And why Inner Mongolia? Well, it happens to have very cheap electricity at about 4 cents per kilowatt. It happens to be very cold because that makes your HVAC systems much simpler. In fact, they use fans blowing in from the outside. It's cheap land, and it's a comfortable 8-hour drive for Beijing. So you're seeing a lot of these kind of facilities that are created in mining. But they're collectively, just for Bitcoin mining, right now consuming about 50 terawatt hours per year, 50 terawatt hours per year. That's a lot of power. Now, I was trying to put that into context, so I said, I wonder how much gold mining with shovels and backhoes consumes, and the answer is about triple that. Gold mining takes about 150 terawatt hours per year. Still, it's a lot. So this is not sustainable, and things need to happen. One of the most promising is a shift from what we call proof of stake today. Proof of stake, or proof of work, is what we're doing today, which means you have to do all this work to find the secret code using these billions of hashes on many, many CPUs. The alternative is called proof of stake, and this is where you put a bunch of your Ethereum coins, for example, into escrow, and whoever has the largest escrow account gets the right to mint the next coin and to be able to build on the next block in the chain. So this is thousands of times more efficient, it consumes less electricity, and it's faster. But there's a lot of details that remain to be worked out. Where is blockchain right now in terms of its development, Steve?
I'm glad you asked. When you take a look at evolution, comparing the internet and how that was a real change of our world in essence, where blockchain is, if you look at the internet, it basically took 40 years to get where we are now. If you look at where we are with blockchain and how that's sort of revolutionizing different industries, and we'll talk about that, it's less than 10 years. So that cycle is just phenomenally accelerated with blockchain.
So we're kind of where the internet was in 98 or 99, and we're moving faster than it did then.
Absolutely. So this is an interesting thing we call the hype cycle. So on one side, you have innovation triggers. On the other side, you have plateau productivity. And you have blockchain right about the peak of inflated expectation right now.
So it's going to go down, but go back up again. So it's not dead.
That's life.
There are many business benefits for that. Maybe you could talk about why it's good.
Yeah, again, this is interesting. Some of the proof of concepts and the work that we're doing with blockchain with our company is for clients of all different industries, and they say why. Basically, you can do things in a general ledger, but there are things that benefit more of a blockchain. And one is assurance, whether it's decentralized. Another is amplification. So when you have things like IoT devices out there, it's just really difficult to get a bunch of databases going at the same time, where when you have a blockchain, it really works well with IoT integration. And oddly enough, serenity. So when you take a look at the transparency that this offers, folks, which we'll get into, like music rights, that they know they're getting paid because they can see how everything is out there. And efficiency. Again, instead of waiting for one central place to process something, you have this distributed across a number of different processors. And probably one of the most important things for a lot of my customers is business intelligence, where a database just keeps information, but when you have this distributed information out there, from users of these devices, you have all this information that can come back and you can use in different ways.
Sounds all good to me, but is it really secure? And that's another question that I hear a lot, and there's sort of a mixed answer, because you've probably been seeing in the press all these announcements of things like the Mt. Gox problem 4 years ago, in which $450 million worth of Bitcoin mysteriously disappeared, or hackers stealing $30 million from the Gao breach, or the Parity company that lost funds. So there's been a lot of concern about this, and we need to understand why and if it's a real problem. Well, when I started to research this, I came across, in November, I was working on it, and this was a new article that came out and described how there were problems, but they're getting better. It's hard to read, I know, so I brought this out. Despite these problems in the past, the developers are optimistic about where it's going to be going into the future. Now, I noted that this was printed on November 3rd is when I was reading it. And of course, 5 days later, on November 8th, 300 million in cryptocurrency accidentally lost forever to a bug. Oops. So in this case, it was a multi-signature wallet company named Parity, and sure enough, a hacker got into it. Parity had repaired a vulnerability that was identified, and they did a quick patch, which they thought was very benign, sent it out, but what it allowed to do, instead of stealing money, it allowed you to remove the name from a wallet. And so this hacker, called DevOps 199, got in there and says, oops, I accidentally killed it. Now, nobody could access that wallet worth roughly $300 million. To this day, that problem has not been solved, and it cannot be easily solved. So sort of like losing a bunch of cash that you will never find again, we have to watch out. So I think the answer there is that the security is actually very good. The cryptography, the hash algorithms are very impenetrable, very secure. However, there have been many vulnerabilities due to programming errors. A coder makes a mistake, just like a lawyer could make a mistake on a paper contract and you end up having unintended consequences. Carelessness, like losing keys in digital wallets, social engineering and stealing somebody's password, or just outright theft, which has happened on a couple of occasions with in-house. Those are very human things. They're not to do with the technology. They do have to be watched out for, but it's not inherent to the technology. Another problem that I've heard a lot is there enough capacity for this? And I think a good analog or a good example is these guys. These are collectible, they're breedable, they're adorable, they're crypto kitties.
So who has them? I'm just curious.
Yeah, how many have crypto kitties out there?
You can be honest.
People have actually paid over $150,000 to own one of these virtual cats. You can get a male and female and using blockchain breed them to have an original offspring and then sell it. So this created so much interest that when it was launched in November, it started to break Ethereum. The volume increased tremendously and created a lot of problems, which was a good lesson. So we say, well, what is the capacity? How does it match? So I went back and looked, and Visa says that their network can handle about 24,000 transactions per second. Well, Ethernet is hardwired to be able to handle 15 transactions per second. Oops, there's the problem. Ethereum, yeah, so there's two solutions to that. One is, well, you could do other coins and other tokens besides Ethereum that have greater capacity, such as Ripple, that's up to 1,500, and Ryblocks, which is blockchain, supporting over 7,000 transactions per second. But there's another way of doing it, which is many of those transactions could be done off block. So they could be done before you have to assemble the complete new block. Perhaps the most interesting right now is Raiden. They have an off-block scaling system that performs these ERC20, which will learn about compliant transfers in a trusted environment without having to go through the whole process of creating a new block. TrueBit is another example where it's a novel structure that uses social engineering by providing affordable incentives to be able to have these in a trusted environment. Plasma is a very new one that's out there, again, experimenting with an algorithmic framework for it. And finally, IOTA, which has a whole different one. They're calling it blockchain generation 2 already, in which they're using something called the tangle, which is a whole bunch of non-block chains that go in parallel between the blocks in order to greatly increase the capacity. Want to talk about what the off-chain and on-chain actually is?
Sure. When we look at what's on-chain and what's off-chain, it really comes to these delays. You know, as Pete was talking about, you know, our client Visa, you can see how fast we process transactions for them. So I'll give you an example. If you went, again, you bought that Coca-Cola at Starbucks, you use your credit card, it clears pretty quickly within seconds. If you bought that same exact coffee with a Bitcoin, that may take 10 minutes to clear just through the processing. So a way to get around it is what we call off-chain or sharing. So we take a number of those processes, instead of processing everything through the entire network, we go through and take a portion of it and we process it off-chain in essence. So
let's talk about the applications, which is the important thing. There's a whole lot of them that are out there.
So one of the important things when you're looking to do blockchain in whatever application is to make sure it's ERC20, which is basically sort of like a SMPTE standard for blockchain. It basically lays out things that your smart contract has to have or should have. So when you take a look at the smart contracts that have occurred, you know, recently, it's about 37,000 contracts. So people are using this, you know, on Ethereum quite a bit.
And I think that's the biggest difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin is that it's not just a currency, but it supports these contracts.
Yeah, when you take a look at this, again, think of Bitcoin, as an application where blockchain is more the underlying technology. And we would take a look at, what's going on. It's not just entertainment, obviously, and it's not just, our financial clients. Some of the things we're working on is for power companies in Europe. So they can have people that have solar panels and charging that electricity to someone else, but the power company stays in control of who gets what. Or things we're doing with insurance companies, where an accident occurs, and then you have adjusters and other third parties getting involved with that specific claim. Or fire departments, where a county has 5 different organizations that have a record of an individual, residence, but there's no easy way to find out that information from a different department. So all these different departments are using blockchain, but besides some of the
Steve, government, insurance, banking, these all make a lot of sense, but did you also know that dentists use DentaCoin in order to do transactions for health services, where you can get your dentist recommended by how many DentaCoins you want to pay and manage your health? And if you're into organic foods, there's now BananaCoin, the world's first blockchain option for investing in organic bananas.
I think I need that one.
And there's many others out there. But let's talk about some of the ones that are, oh, and I should mention this one as well. It's gotten so silly that there's one called the useless Ethernet token. They claim it's the world's first 100% honest Ethereum ICO, into initial coin offering, because you are going to give some random guy on the internet lots of money, and sure enough, he got $328,000 for that.
There you go. And let's bring it home. Let's talk about Hollywood. So, I've given this example before, but I think a way to bring it home is, I like to write feature film scripts just for fun. So, say I wrote a script and I want to sell it, but I want to send it to Pete. Say Pete's my agent, and I send him a PDF. There's no way that I know today that he got it or who he showed it to. So I'm sort of concerned as a writer with this. So now imagine if I had a technology that would allow me to take my copyright, embed that into my script, and if Pete opens it, I know based on his particular computer and his IP exactly when he opened it and who he shared it with. And that goes through the whole process. He sells my option, that goes along, here it is. So again, I send it to, we'll call you Alice. I send you my script to Alice. I mean, as you see, the first blockchain is me. I've registered it. We see that, we've recorded it. The next part of the block is the transfer to the agent. We know exactly when they open it. They send it off. Go to the next one. So we go to production. So I'm on the set, I'm shooting my DIT, it removes the drive from my cameras, and they move it to a different set of drives. I've recorded things from the drive exactly when that occurred and who that person was, and they send it to my editor. The editor opens that file, we know exactly what that happens. We bring it to the next part, distribution. Say I sign up with XYZ Flicks to sell my movie, and a viewer on the other side, Tom, opens it up on his browser. We know exactly when Tom opens that up. Again, that gets recorded, so I can send my revenue back to everyone that participated in my movie, and they get a percentage of it. So again, a specific application for a blockchain.
This isn't just theoretical. We've identified over 30 companies that are in this business that are doing these very things right now. Each one of them deserves 15 or 30 minutes to talk about their exciting business model, but we're going to fly through them, starting with some current examples. For example, we've separated this down to like a half a dozen use cases, the first of which is feature film financing. Here's the first Ethereum-funded movie, apparently. It's called The Pitts Circus. It's a mockumentary that was shot in Australia and released worldwide starting in November. They use what's called Ethereum Movie Venture coins, and the people that invested, up to $1.8 million, share in the revenue after the first 25%. So, and this is for 20 years. So the idea is that you become a film investor. Here's another first of feature films. This is the slate of 5 films that was announced in December, science fiction, that's supposed to be from a major studio. This is being financed by a company called Singular DTV out of New York with what they call tokens. And they, again, have started a fundraising campaign that seems to be pretty successful. And I found yet a third first major feature film to be funded through Ethereum called Braid, also out of New York. They were able to raise $1.7 million and haven't produced anything yet, but we'll see. Now, there's a lot more, and this is where it gets really interested in terms of production and post-production. If you want to look at computing and rendering, suppose you want to think of this as the Airbnb for your CPU or your GPU. Yes, you can do that. Golem project out of Germany is launching a system called Golem Brass that is, they're saying, is a worldwide distributed peer-to-peer supercomputer that combines capacity from all over the world, and in exchange for your loaning some of your compute time on your desk, you get Golem coins back. That's off and running. Another one is called the Render Token. That's out of Los Angeles, the Otoy company that some of you may be familiar with for their work in volumetric imaging. And they have what's called the Render Token, which is specifically for GPU tokens. I should mention that Golem is also focusing on CGI, especially with Blender files to start out with. And then there's another one called Elastic, which also claims to be creating a supercomputer by joining together hundreds of thousands of CPUs and GPUs across the network with reimbursement and security through blockchain. To talk about render tokens just a bit, Jules Urbach, who started this, claims that there's about 50,000 GPUs in the public cloud today, but about 250 million available elsewhere. If you could just tap into, say, 1% of those, you've created an ability to do $21 billion worth of central cloud infrastructure without having to lift a finger. And he actually had the foresight to do a patent on that, and this is, out of all these that I've looked at, the only one that seems to have some good IP protection behind this idea.
You know, looking at that, it's funny, you know, that you think there is Amazon and out there, but when you look at the rates, I don't know if we're going to talk about that, it's significantly cheaper than using Amazon for GPU processing, which was really surprising. So music rights, this is another thing that they obviously felt an enormous amount of pain. You know, songwriters didn't necessarily feel justice that they were getting paid, you know, what they should. Singers, the same sort of thing, musicians in a band. So based on that pain point, they've used blockchain, again, you've got a bunch of parties that don't necessarily trust each other, to track what's going on in a very open way. So a number of these things do this. The other interesting thing, which is a perfect example of a bunch of folks working together that don't trust each other, but found that blockchain is a good solution, is ASCAP, working with these other groups that could or could not compete with them for a blockchain solution to track music rights.
The blockchain should eliminate the middleman, but in this case, the middleman is trying to get out on a party. Let's take another one, Airbnb for storage. There's several alternatives. Storage.io is out there, and they claim to be able to do a gigabyte of storage per month for $0.015, which is pretty competitive rates. And again, this is a blockchain-based, end-to-end, fully encrypted, blockchain-based distributed network for storage. Sia Coin is another initiative, and here they're comparing some of the prices. They're saying that their price is about 1/10 of what you pay for public cloud storage on S3 or Google Cloud or Azure, and has other advantages, and maybe there's disadvantages, but we haven't fully identified those yet. And there's yet another called Filecoin, which is a very similar business model. They're focused more on the algorithmic implementations for that. And distribution.
Yeah, so we're looking at disruption, right? YouTube was disruptive. You take a look at Tron, an example of how they're using blockchain for disruption. This is one to really watch. This is a young kid, 30 years old, but he's sort of like out of the Alibaba camp, went to the same school as Jack did. So tons of Chinese money, but what he's doing, he's enabling creators to be able to sell to their viewers, eliminating that middleman, which used to be YouTube.
And there's a lot of other folks.
A lot of other companies, which again justifies, you know, blockchain in this space.
And advertising. Comcast Advanced Advertising Group, basic attention tokens, actually pays the viewers to have their attention in order to watch the ads. MadHive is going between platforms to compare audiences, and MetaX. There's a lot of implementations. We only have a few seconds, so let's do this quickly.
Talk fast. So 2 implementations you need to look at: permissionless blockchain if you're dealing with the public, permission blockchain if you're like the big 6 studios here in town and you want to determine who comes in and comes out. A quick look of what Hollywood would look like with blockchain. It's not just one, it's a grouping of them. You've got the big 6 studio in the middle, you've got the accounting firms as a side chain, you've got the public consumption on the other side.
All these slides are on there with a lot of bonus slides. Blockchain is a distributed peer-to-peer ledger system. It has underlying technology of cryptocurrency, but it's much more because it has smart contracts, it can eliminate intermediaries, it has risks, and there will be scams.
And I'm afraid that's all we can talk about.
Look at that, perfect timing.
Aha. Thank you very much.
Thanks.